The bride turned away from her groom the moment his wheelchair rolled into the church. Everything he had, his company, his name, his future, depended on the next 60 seconds. But the maid kneeling beside him had seen something no one else in that ballroom had noticed. His hands were shaking, his eyes were wet, and the woman he loved was already walking toward the doors. What she whispered to him next would change both of their lives forever, but not in the way anyone expected. Welcome back to another story about love, betrayal, and the quiet strength that changes everything. If you enjoy emotional stories with real twists and endings that stay with you, you're in the right place. Where are you watching from tonight? Let us know in the comments and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Daniel Whitfield had built an empire out of steel and glass. At 36, he owned 4 companies, a penthouse that looked out over the whole city, and more money than most people could imagine spending in 3 lifetimes. But 6 months ago, a car accident on a rain-soaked highway had taken away something no amount of money could buy back: the full use of his legs. He didn't talk about it much. He'd gone through the anger, the denial, the long nights staring at the ceiling wondering if his life was over. And somehow, he'd come out the other side steadier than before. He still ran his company from a wheelchair. He still showed up to every meeting early. If anything, the accident had made him quieter, more thoughtful, less interested in the noise of his old life. His fiancée, Vanessa Cole, hadn't changed at all. She was beautiful in the way magazine covers are beautiful. Polished, poised, always aware of who was watching. When Daniel had first proposed 2 years earlier, Vanessa had seemed like the perfect partner. Charming at dinner parties. Effortless in photographs. She knew which fork to use and which senator's wife to compliment first. What Daniel hadn't fully understood back then was that Vanessa loved the idea of him more than she loved him. A success. Name. The mansion in the hills. When the accident happened, something in her had quietly recoiled, though she was careful never to let him see it. "Of course I still love you," she told him in the hospital, holding his hand while a photographer from a gossip site snapped pictures through the window. "Nothing's changed between us." But something had changed. He just didn't want to believe it yet. Isabel Carter had been working in the Whitfield household for almost a year. She was 27, quiet, and precise in the way she moved through a room. Never intrusive, always aware. She'd taken the job after her husband left her with a 2-year-old daughter and a stack of bills. She needed the steady paycheck, and Daniel Whitfield, despite his reputation as a hard-driving businessman, had always treated the staff with basic decency. He said please. He remembered names. When Isabel's daughter Maya had a fever last winter, he told her to take the week off paid, no questions asked. Vanessa was a different story. She was polite to Isabel in front of Daniel, sugary, almost theatrical, and cold the moment he left the room. Small things at first. A comment about how the ironing wasn't quite right. A complaint that dinner had been served 5 minutes late. Nothing anyone could call cruel outright. Just enough to keep Isabel on edge. Always a little smaller than she wanted to be. Isabel noticed things, though. She noticed how Vanessa's phone was always turned face down on the counter. She noticed how Vanessa disappeared for spa days, that sometimes lasted until midnight. She noticed the way Vanessa's assistant, a nervous young man named Trent, sometimes looked at Isabel like he wanted to say something and then thought better of it. But it wasn't her place to say anything. Not yet. The wedding had been planned for over a year. A 500-guest affair at the Whitfield family estate, with a cathedral-length veil and enough white roses to fill a greenhouse. After the accident, Daniel had quietly offered Vanessa an out. "You don't have to go through with this," he'd said one evening, sitting across from her in his wheelchair. His voice steady but his eyes searching hers. "I know this isn't the life you signed up for." Vanessa had taken his hand, and for a moment, something in her face had looked almost real. "Daniel, I'm not marrying your legs. I'm marrying you." He'd wanted so badly to believe her. The morning of the wedding, Isabel arrived early to help set up, as she always did. She found Vanessa in the bridal suite, already dressed, staring at her phone with an expression Isabel had never seen on her before. Not the practiced sweetness, not the icy control, but something closer to panic. "Everything all right, Miss Cole?" Isabel asked carefully. Vanessa's head snapped up. For half a second, her mask slipped completely. "Get out," she said. Then, catching herself, she added in a softer voice, "I just need a minute alone. Please." Isabel stepped into the hallway, and that was when she saw Trent, Vanessa's assistant, slipping out a side door with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice low and urgent. She only caught a few words. "Can't do this today, not with everyone watching." She didn't think much of it at the time. There was too much to do. Chairs to arrange, flowers to deliver, 100 small emergencies that come with a wedding this size. But something about that conversation stayed lodged in the back of her mind, like a splinter she couldn't quite reach. By 11 that morning, guests had begun arriving at the estate's private chapel, a converted ballroom with gold-leafed columns and 3 enormous chandeliers. Daniel waited near the altar in his wheelchair, dressed in a light blue suit. His best man adjusting his boutonniere. He looked calm. He looked, Isabel thought, like a man who had finally made peace with the life in front of him. Vanessa was supposed to walk down the aisle at noon. At 11:50, she still hadn't left the bridal suite. At 11:55, Isabel knocked on the door to tell her it was time, and found the room empty except for a folded note on the vanity table. Isabel's stomach dropped as she read it. Her hands were shaking as she made her way back toward the ballroom, the note clutched against her chest, wondering how she was supposed to tell 300 guests, and the man who had shown her more kindness than almost anyone in her life, that the bride wasn't coming. Isabel didn't get the chance to deliver the news quietly. Vanessa walked in herself 12 minutes late, her face arranged into something between grief and defiance, and the entire ballroom fell silent as she made her way down the aisle, not toward Daniel, but stopping several feet short of him, right in front of the wheelchair, in front of everyone. "I can't do this," she said, loud enough for the back rows to hear. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Daniel's best man froze mid-step. Somewhere near the back, a champagne glass clinked against a table. Daniel looked up at her, and for one long moment, his face didn't move at all. Isabel, standing near the side aisle with a folded note still in her pocket, felt something twist in her chest watching him try to process what was happening in real time, in front of everyone he knew. "Vanessa," he said quietly. "Not like this." "I'm sorry," she said, though her voice carried more irritation than sorrow. "I thought I could. I really did. But I didn't sign up to push a wheelchair around for the rest of my life." The words landed like a physical blow. Somewhere in the crowd, someone actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. Daniel's mother, seated in the front row, put a hand over her mouth. His father stood up as if to intervene, then sat back down, unsure what there was left to do. Vanessa turned, her wedding dress swishing dramatically behind her, and began walking back up the aisle. She didn't look at Daniel again. She didn't look at anyone. She simply walked out the same door she'd come in through, leaving 300 guests, a mountain of white roses, and a groom in a wheelchair sitting frozen at the altar. Isabel moved before she even decided to. She crossed the floor and knelt down beside Daniel's chair, placing a steady hand on his arm, not to comfort him with words, because there weren't any good ones, but just to remind him someone was still there. "Mr. Whitfield," she said quietly, "let's get you somewhere private. You don't have to do this in front of everyone." He didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the doors Vanessa had just walked through, and for a moment Isabel wondered if he'd even heard her. Then slowly he nodded, and let her wheel him toward a side room off the ballroom while the guests began murmuring behind them, already reaching for their phones. Once the door closed behind them, Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for the past 10 minutes. I should have seen this coming, he said, more to himself than to Isabel. You couldn't have known, she said. Couldn't I? His laugh was hollow. She's been distant for months. I told myself it was stress. Wedding planning. I didn't want to believe. He stopped himself, pressing his palm against his forehead. Isabel hesitated. She thought about the note in her pocket, the one she'd found on Vanessa's vanity, folded in half with Trent's name scrawled on the outside in Vanessa's handwriting. She hadn't opened it. It wasn't hers to open. But something told her it mattered. Mr. Whitfield, she said carefully, there's something I think you should see. She pulled the folded paper from her apron pocket and held it out. Daniel stared at it for a long moment before taking it, his hands still not entirely steady. He unfolded it and read in silence. Isabel watched his face change. Confusion first, then something harder, colder, as his eyes moved across whatever was written there. Where did you find this? He asked, his voice low. On her vanity. I wasn't looking for anything, sir. I was just checking if she was ready. Daniel read it again, then folded it back up slowly, like he was trying to buy himself time to think. This isn't addressed to me, he said. It's addressed to Trent. Isabel's chest tightened. She hadn't read it, but she'd suspected as much from the way Vanessa's assistant had been slipping around all morning, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and anxious. I don't know what it means, she said honestly. I only know I found it, and I thought you deserved to see it before anyone else did. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, the way people rarely did with the household staff, like she was a person and not simply part of the furniture of his life. Thank you, he said quietly, for bringing me here instead of leaving me out there. And for this. He held up the note. Most people would have kept walking. I wasn't going to leave you like that, Isabel said simply. Nobody deserves that. Outside, the ballroom had erupted into hushed chaos. Guests whispering, photographers who'd been hired for the wedding now capturing an entirely different kind of story, Daniel's family trying to manage the fallout. But in the quiet of that side room, something had shifted. Daniel wasn't looking at his fiancée's betrayal anymore. He was looking at the note in his hand, turning over a single line in his mind, one that didn't add up. The note mentioned money, a specific amount, and a date that was still 3 weeks away. Whatever Vanessa Cole had planned, her humiliating exit at the altar wasn't the end of it. It was only the beginning of something far more calculated than a broken engagement. The weeks after the wedding disaster were quiet in the way a house is quiet after a storm, the kind of stillness that makes you wait for the next crash. Daniel threw himself back into work almost immediately, arriving at the office earlier than his own assistants, staying later than the cleaning crew. It was easier to bury himself in spreadsheets and board meetings than to sit with the humiliation of what had happened in front of everyone he knew. The tabloids had a field day. Billionaire jilted at altar over wheelchair, ran across 3 different sites within 24 hours. He stopped reading the news after the second week. But the note stayed with him. He kept it locked in his desk drawer, and some nights after everyone else had gone home, he'd take it out and read it again, trying to make sense of the numbers scrawled beside Trent's name. He finally brought it to his head of security, a retired detective named Marcus Reyes who'd handled sensitive matters for the Whitfield family for over a decade. Marcus read the note twice, his expression darkening. This is about your accounts, Daniel, he said. Or it's about to be. Took Marcus less than a week to find the thread. Vanessa Cole hadn't simply been planning a wedding for the past year. She'd been quietly moving money. Small transfers first, routed through joint accounts Daniel had set up in good faith during their engagement, accounts meant for wedding expenses and shared investments. Over the past 8 months, nearly $200,000 had been funneled out through a shell account connected to Trent's name. She's been building an exit, Marcus explained, spreading documents across Daniel's desk. This wasn't a spontaneous decision at the altar. This was planned. The wedding date, the accident, all of it. She was working an angle the entire time. Daniel sat in silence, staring at the papers. So the accident changed her plans, he said slowly. But the money was already moving before that. Looks that way, Marcus said. My guess is she saw an opportunity to walk away clean, publicly, sympathetically. The tragic fiancée who couldn't handle her partner's disability, while quietly finishing what she'd already started financially. It was a strange kind of relief, mixed with a fresh wave of anger. At least now Daniel understood he hadn't imagined the coldness in Vanessa these past months. He hadn't been paranoid. He'd been right to feel something was wrong, and he'd talked himself out of trusting his own instincts. Back at the estate, life had settled into an uneasy new rhythm. Isabel continued working in the house, quieter now, careful not to overstep, though Daniel had started seeking her out more. Not for anything specific, just to talk. He found himself more than once, wheeling into the kitchen in the evening while she made dinner for her daughter, Maya, who sometimes toddled around the estate's kitchen in mismatched socks, chattering about her day at daycare. Maya had taken an immediate liking to Daniel. She didn't seem to notice the wheelchair the way adults did. To her, it was simply a very interesting chair with wheels, and she'd often ask if she could have a ride. One evening, while Isabel was finishing the dishes and Maya sat coloring at the kitchen table, the little girl looked up at Daniel with the unfiltered honesty only a 3-year-old could manage. The pretty lady was mean to Mommy, she said matter-of-factly, going back to her drawing as if she'd just commented on the weather. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. What do you mean, sweetheart? Isabel's hands stilled at the sink. Maya, honey, finish your picture, she said quickly, a little too quickly. But Daniel had already caught it. Isabel, he said gently, once Maya was absorbed again in her crayons. What did Vanessa do? Isabel sighed, drying her hands on a dish towel, clearly weighing how much to say. It wasn't anything worth troubling you with. She wasn't kind to me, Mr. Whitfield. She never was when you weren't in the room. Little comments, making me feel small. It's not unusual working in a house like this. I didn't think it was my place to complain. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach, not just at what Vanessa had apparently done to Isabel, but at how easily he'd missed it. He thought of himself as observant, as someone who paid attention to the people around him. But he'd been so wrapped up in his own recovery, his own fears about the future, that he hadn't noticed the woman he was about to marry treating his employee with quiet cruelty right under his nose. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. That should never have happened in my house. You didn't do it, Isabel said simply. You don't have to apologize for someone else's behavior. But Daniel couldn't quite let it go. That night, after Isabel had left for the day, he sat in his study going over the financial documents Marcus had compiled, and for the first time, a new thought took shape, one that connected two things he hadn't thought to connect before. The shell account Trent had helped Vanessa set up wasn't just receiving money. It had also, 3 months ago, made a single payment to a private investigator. And the investigator's most recent invoice, buried in a stack of receipts Marcus had recovered, was for a background check. Not on Daniel. On Isabel Carter. Daniel stared at the invoice until the numbers stopped making sense. A private investigator, paid through Vanessa's shell account, had run a background check on Isabel 6 weeks before the wedding. Not a routine employment verification, the kind of deep-dive investigation reserved for people you were building a case against. He called Marcus first thing the next morning. I need to know what they found, Daniel said. And I need to know why Vanessa was digging into my maid's personal history. It took Marcus 2 days to track down the investigator, a man named Gary Pruitt who ran a small firm out of a strip mall office and, after some pointed questions and the mention of a subpoena, was willing to talk in exchange for having his name kept out of it. What he'd found was almost nothing. Isabel Carter had no criminal record, no debts beyond a modest car loan, no scandal to speak of. A single mother working hard, paying her bills, raising her daughter. Pruitt had told Vanessa exactly that months ago. She wasn't happy about it, Pruitt admitted. She wanted me to keep digging. Told me to find something. Anything. I told her there wasn't anything to find. And she paid me anyway to write up a report suggesting Isabel had a history of, quote, targeting wealthy employers. Wasn't true. I told her I wouldn't put my name on something fabricated. She found someone else to draft it instead. Daniel's stomach turned. She was building a case against Isabel. Why? Pruitt shrugged. My guess. Insurance. In case you ever got suspicious about the money. Or in case you got a little too close to your maid. Character assassination's a cheap way to make sure nobody believes the person telling the truth. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Vanessa hadn't just been stealing from Daniel. She'd been quietly preparing a smear campaign against the one person in the household who might notice and speak up. If Isabel had ever come forward about the missing money or Vanessa's behavior, Vanessa would have had a fabricated report ready to discredit her instantly. Daniel sat with that knowledge for a long moment before deciding what to do next. Confronting Vanessa directly felt like the obvious move, but Marcus urged caution. They needed everything airtight first, every transfer documented, every signature verified, before giving her any warning that they were onto her. It took another 10 days to finish building the case. In that time, something had shifted in the house, a kind of unspoken understanding between Daniel and Isabel. He no longer treated her simply as staff. He sought her opinion, valued her steadiness, found himself looking forward to the small, ordinary moments in the kitchen at the end of a long day. She never asked for anything, never pushed, never tried to take advantage of his growing trust, which more than anything else made him trust her completely. The confrontation happened on a Thursday afternoon, when Vanessa arrived unannounced at the estate, not for reconciliation but to collect the last of her belongings, a task she'd been putting off for weeks. Daniel met her in the same ballroom where she'd left him at the altar, Marcus standing quietly by the door with a folder in hand. I have some questions, Daniel said. About $200,000. Vanessa's face went carefully blank, the practiced composure of someone who'd rehearsed for exactly this moment and still wasn't quite ready for it. I don't know what you're talking about. The shell account. Trent's name on the paperwork. The private investigator you paid to dig up dirt on Isabel when he couldn't find any. Daniel's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, something Vanessa had never heard from him before. You spent the last 8 months planning your exit while pretending to plan our wedding. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to build a case against an innocent woman just in case she ever told the truth about you. For the first time, Vanessa's composure cracked. You don't understand what it's like, she said, her voice rising. Everyone expected me to spend the rest of my life pushing you around in that chair, smiling for cameras, pretending I didn't miss the life we were supposed to have. I deserved better than that. You could have just left, Daniel said quietly. I offered you an out. More than once. You didn't have to steal from me. You didn't have to try to destroy someone who never did anything to you. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward the door, toward Isabel, who had just entered the room carrying a stack of folded linens, frozen mid-step at the sight of the confrontation unfolding in front of her. She's the reason you're doing this, Vanessa snapped, some of the old venom returning to her voice. I saw the way you look at her now. Don't pretend this is about the money. The room went very still. Isabel stood frozen in the doorway, the stack of linens still in her arms, watching the accusation hang in the air like something sharp. Daniel turned his wheelchair slightly, looking between Vanessa and Isabel, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but absolutely certain. This isn't about her, he said. This is about you stealing from me and trying to ruin an innocent woman's reputation to cover your tracks. Don't try to twist this into something it isn't. I gave you 2 years of my life, Vanessa said, her voice cracking now, somewhere between fury and desperation. You gave me 2 years of a performance, Daniel corrected. I met the real you at the altar, in front of 300 people. And I've been meeting more of her every day since. He nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward and opened the folder. We have documentation of every transfer, Marcus said. Bank records, the shell account under Trent Sullivan's name, the falsified background report on Ms. Carter, and Mr. Pruitt's sworn statement that you asked him to fabricate evidence. Mr. Whitfield's lawyers have already been in contact with the district attorney's office. Vanessa's face drained of color. You're going to press charges. Over some money that was practically mine anyway. It was never yours, Daniel said. And no, this isn't about revenge. It's about consequences. You'll return what you took, and you'll face whatever the law decides about the rest. I'm not interested in destroying your life the way you tried to destroy someone else's. I just won't protect you from what you've done. Vanessa looked around the room one last time. At Marcus with his folder of evidence, at Daniel sitting steady and unshaken in his wheelchair, and finally at Isabel, who met her gaze without flinching, without satisfaction, just quiet, unwavering dignity. This isn't over, Vanessa said, though the words sounded hollow even as she said them. It is for you, Daniel replied. Please leave. 2 security guards escorted her out. Nobody in the room said anything until the front door closed behind her, and the silence that followed felt less like tension and more like relief, like a held breath finally released. Isabel set the linens down carefully on a nearby chair. I'm sorry you had to go through that, she said softly. I'm not sorry it's over, Daniel said. He wheeled a little closer to her. Isabel, I owe you an apology. For not noticing what was happening in my own house. For not protecting you from someone I brought into it. You don't owe me anything, she said. You believed me when it mattered. That's more than most people would have done. In the weeks that followed, the truth came out publicly. Not through tabloid speculation this time, but through an official statement Daniel's legal team released, carefully worded but unmistakably clear. Vanessa Cole faced charges for fraud and attempted fabrication of evidence. The investigator, Gary Pruitt, cooperated fully in exchange for immunity. Trent Sullivan, it turned out, had been far more reluctant participant than accomplice, pressured into helping under threat of losing his job, and he too came forward once the case became public, offering his own testimony. The public narrative shifted almost overnight. From Billionaire jilted at altar to something far more sympathetic, though Daniel found he cared less about public opinion than he once had. What mattered more was the quiet, steady rebuilding happening in his own life. He started physical therapy again, this time not out of obligation but genuine hope, regaining strength in his legs, working toward walking with assistance, then eventually with a cane. It was slow, difficult work, but he no longer faced it alone. Isabel remained in his life, not as staff exactly, though she still worked for him for a while longer, until one evening, months later, sitting in the same kitchen where Maya had first spoken her innocent, unknowing truth, Daniel asked Isabel if she'd consider something different. Not employment, but partnership, in whatever form she was comfortable with, at whatever pace felt right to her. She didn't answer right away. She'd learned the hard way to be careful with promises. But she also knew, in a way she couldn't quite explain, that this was different. Daniel hadn't fallen for her because she was convenient or grateful or easy to overlook. He'd noticed her, really noticed her, in the moments that mattered most, when it would have been easier not to. "Let's take our time," she said finally, smiling for the first time in what felt like months. "But yes, I'd like that." Maya, sitting at the table with her crayons, looked up at exactly the right moment, as 3-year-olds sometimes do. "Are you gonna get married in the wheelchair too?" she asked Daniel, entirely serious. Daniel laughed. A real laugh, the first one in a long time. "Maybe someday," he said. "But this time I think we'll do it right." If you were in Isabel's position, would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken up the way she did? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you, subscribe for more stories about truth, dignity and second chances. And we'll see you in the next one.